Tommy Lasorda will live forever. Hi everybody, I'm Marky Billson, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Tommy Lasorda, and yes, it's another one of those I met Tommy Lasorda stories, but isn't it great that it seems like everybody has one of these stories? His life, it's like a wonderful life, with Jimmy Stewart. His life touched so many, and that's why it seems like so many people have stories about Tommy Lasorda, and they're all the same thing, just what a wonderful person he is. Sean Mullooly, a sports writing friend of mine, actually said, Tommy Lasorda was the nicest famous person I have ever met, and he had that about him, and he was just such a great ambassador of baseball. And why do I say he's going to live forever? Because when people will talk about baseball managers, I mean, they may look at a Tony La Russa and see victories and some world titles, but they're not necessarily going to see personality. When you think of Tommy Lasorda, you put him in that list of great baseball managers with personality. The Casey Stengels, the John McGraws, who had larger-than-life personalities and such, and it really made baseball come to America based on their own personality. And, of course, he was so good at motivating his team, keeping the Dodgers in contention, winning the World Series with an undermanned team in 1988. And so, even though I really stress, do not wear team gear while doing these videos. You're an objective reporter. You're going to show bias if you are going to be wearing team gear. Honestly, there's only one way to remember Tommy Lasorda and give my Tommy Lasorda story, and that is wearing the cap of the 1916 Brooklyn Robins. They were known as the Robins because of their manager of the time, Wilbert Robinson, who himself was one of the great managers of baseball in its early days, in the early 20th century. Wilbert Robinson and John McGraw really helped make the, I guess it was Giants-Robins rivalry back then, New York-Brooklyn. But let's just say what we now know as the Giants-Dodgers rivalry. These two managers who were actually at one time next-door neighbors really made that rivalry that is still felt today one of the most passionate in sports. You can really trace it back to the Robinson days. And as I said, the Dodgers then were known as the Robins. In fact, their secondary nickname of the time was not the Bums, but rather the Flock. And that was actually something that headline writers would continue to call the Brooklyn Dodgers until the day they moved. I could show you literally headlines in New York newspapers that referred to the Dodgers as the Flock, even in 1957. That dates to their Robins days. Now, I'm telling you this story about the 1916 Dodgers because I had a cousin, Hy Myers, 3 generations removed. He did die before I was born, but I had a cousin who was their starting center fielder, the Brooklyn Robins 1916 center fielder, and his name is Hy Myers. And in his time, a little more than, I guess it's now, 2021? Yeah, he would have been the starting center fielder, kind of towards the end of his career there, but with the Brooklyn Robins, he was their starting center fielder for about 10 years. In the 1916 World Series, he had a home run off of Babe Ruth, and to this day, no player for either the Brooklyn or Los Angeles Dodgers have hit more triples in a season than Hy Myers' 22 in 1920. So he still has the franchise record for triples in a season. Like old Brooklyn fans can, LA Dodgers haven't been able to top Hy Myers, and yeah, considering how we all know how just, horrible that move was, and it broke the hearts of everyone in Brooklyn and all that, to still have a Brooklyn Dodger record on the books, and it's my cousin, I do take some family pride in that, if you will. Many will know that I am a former baseball broadcaster, maybe a future baseball broadcaster, who knows, but I have called the games for 3 different minor league baseball teams, all of which have gone out of business. So that's why I'm not a minor league baseball broadcaster anymore, but it was 1999, the baseball winter meetings in Nashville, Tennessee, and I go to them in the vast Opryland Hotel to try to get a position as a baseball broadcaster with a professional team. The baseball winter meetings have all the men of baseball, all the front office execs, and Tommy Lasorda was working at that time in the front office of the Los Angeles Dodgers. And, you know, there are some baseball celebrities that do really stand out of the baseball winter meetings. Tommy Lasorda always had a wave for everyone who would recognize him in the lobby, a kind word if you came up to him, that sort of thing. You know, just a person that you love to meet. And so, after a day of submitting resumes and interviewing and so on and so forth and talking to other job hopefuls, I go across the street from the Opryland Hotel. There's a country and western bar. It's Nashville, obviously. And you're in Nashville, do as the Nashvillians do, right? Go to the country and western bar. So I go in there, and who should be standing in the lobby by himself but Tommy Lasorda? And it's one of those things where you're like, Tommy Lasorda! I mean, it just naturally comes to you, you know, and all this you exclaim. And there he is, and I've always wanted to meet you, and, you know, extends his hand to me, how do you do, this sort of thing, you know, and just naturally welcoming, you know, inclusive, that sort of thing, made you feel like you knew him all his life. And of course I have to say, hey, you probably answered everything, but I've got to ask you this question. Now, you have to understand this about the Brooklyn Dodgers. They were the first team to really popularize Old Timers Day. The Brooklyn Dodgers really did honor their history from the days of being the Flock, which I guess I just said they never really lost. But another good example, in 1949, the Dodgers won the pennant, played the Yankees in a World Series, and so they invited, Branch Rickey did this, as a matter of fact, the first World Series team that Brooklyn had, the 1916 Dodgers, I guess they were the Robins back then, to Brooklyn for a reunion dinner and to watch the World Series. They wanted to honor their very first World Series team, and sure enough, Hy Myers was part of that event. And, you know, Tommy Lasorda was a Brooklyn Dodger. Now, he may have only had a cup of coffee with them, but he was a honest-to-goodness major leaguer. In fact, I know there was a 15-card baseball card set once made of the Brooklyn Dodgers, and Lasorda was part of that set, along with Pee Wee Reese and Jackie Robinson and all the greats of that era. Because he was such a promising prospect. It was Sandy Koufax that actually kept him out of the major leagues for a great period of time. He liked to say it took the greatest left-handed pitcher of all time to keep me out of the majors, because Koufax was a bonus baby, which meant that the Dodgers had to keep him on their major league roster, or else they would lose their rights to him. And so that's how Koufax, who really should have been in the minor leagues and developing, was actually kept on as the last pitcher on the Brooklyn Dodgers staff for their last 3 years in Brooklyn. He was a member of the 55 Boys of Summer, pitching in 12 games. But Tommy Lasorda was part of that ilk as well, and so I thought maybe they're two paths. Hy Myers in a reunion or something, and Tommy Lasorda's paths might have crossed. And sadly, they didn't. He told me that. But here's the thing. I'm telling Tommy Lasorda about, I'm related to the player that has your team's record for triples in a season. And all of a sudden, I get to tell Tommy Lasorda, Mr. Dodger himself, about his franchise's history, about Hy Myers, about being friends with Casey Stengel and his role in the famous day in the Dodgers' first ever Sunday game at Ebbets Field where they charged admissions, the time where Casey Stengel tipped his cap to the fans and a sparrow flew out. Yeah, Myers had a hand in that. Essentially what had occurred is that he had hit a inside the park home run that got past Casey Stengel in the outfield, and he knew he was going to get it from the crowd when he came up to hit Casey Stengel. So got a bird from one of the Dodgers in the bullpen who was playing with a sparrow, said, could you give me that? Stuck it under his cap, and when he came to bat, tipped his hat to the crowd, and they started letting him have it, and the sparrow flew out. That's the story right there. Well, you know, my cousin has it. I'm telling these stories to Tommy Lasorda. Me. And he's like very intrigued by this. I'm telling Dodgers history to Tommy Lasorda, stuff he doesn't know. And so he listens, and he's just gracious. He just is eating it up, and he comes up to me and says, "So you're a Dodgers fan?" Well, what do you got to say? You can't deny Tommy Lasorda. I mean, I may be the kid from Pittsburgh who fell in love with the We Are Family Pirates and all this, but hey, I've got a cousin who, was from Brooklyn in the era of the Dodgers, who married into the family, and he used to tell me stories about how his father was a Brooklyn police officer, he used to arrest the Dodger Symphony and all this, minor stuff, that sort of thing. But, it was... Well, sure, Tommy, I'm a Dodgers fan. Brooklyn had to stay loyal. Had to stay loyal to the bums, right? And all this. Had to stay loyal to the family and protest the move one last time and all this. But that was Tommy Lasorda. I met him once, and he made me feel like I knew him all his life. And I was able to educate him on Dodgers history, of all things. Bill Roth today, the great sportscaster, used to be Virginia Tech's play-by-play broadcaster. He's got a great Tommy Lasorda story today about meeting when he was 16 years old, and how as a 16-year-old reporter, Lasorda took him in under his wing briefly and was extraordinarily friendly to him. And that was just Tommy Lasorda. It's what I felt when I met him. Bill Roth, ironically, would go on to become the UCLA broadcaster. He's got a Tommy Lasorda story from his youth. I mean, that's what kind of an ambassador he was. I always thought Tommy Lasorda would have made a great baseball commissioner. Now, Lasorda didn't play for the Dodgers exclusively. He actually played with the Kansas City Athletics, and a lot of people get on him. His one-loss record as a pitcher with the old Kansas City A's was 0-4, but he did have one pitching save. And if you look up the records of that long ago 1956 game, you'll find that he came on in relief with the tying run on base, a one-run game, and got the last out to save the game for the Kansas City A's. Now, one thing about that, the runner at second base at the time was Rino Bertoria, who was born in St. Vito, Udine, Italy. You know how Tommy Lasorda was so proud of his Italian heritage. I always thought that was the cherry on top of the sundae of the one great major league event of Tommy Lasorda, his pitching save for the 1956 Kansas City Athletics. There was some tragedy in Tommy Lasorda's life. Tommy Lasorda Jr. passed away very, very young, in his 30s and such. And there was an article written about Tommy Lasorda Jr. That was, I thought, very complimentary, actually, to his son. There were allegations that Tommy Lasorda Jr. was a homosexual. So what if he was? What he came across of in the article was an extremely likable person. Well, like father, like son. And Tommy Lasorda was one of those guys that you always loved to hear from, that was so entertaining, and he was one of the reasons why you loved baseball. I thought he was a great manager, too. I loved his strategy. I loved how he would praise players and put them into positions to succeed. It's very well known that the 1988 Dodgers, they were the serious underdogs to the Oakland A's in the World Series, but they won the World Series in 5 games. They were injury-riddled, but at one time, they even won a game with Mike Davis, who had a 196 batting average in 1988, batting cleanup. Now, Orel Hershiser carried him, and Lasorda was one of the last managers who would push his starters to go 9 innings. There were some that criticized him, oh, you're burning out your pitchers, but let me tell you something, the Dodgers don't win the World Series in 1988 if he doesn't ask for 9 innings from Orel Hershiser, who then set the record that season for consecutive innings pitched without allowing a run. And in fact came on in relief after starting a game in the playoffs the day before, and he helped the Dodgers win the game in relief and beat the New York Mets in a 7-game series back in 1988. Dodgers were the underdog to the Mets in 1988 in the playoffs as well, back in the days of 4 teams making the postseason. Like I said, Tommy Lasorda may not be with us physically anymore, but as long as baseball is played, he is going to be one of those figures like a Stengel, like a McGraw. He was one of the managers that made managing. Today's manager is something of a caretaker who devises strategy poorly by rote. Tommy Lasorda won games for the Dodgers with his strategy. He will be remembered as long as baseball is played. Folks, if you like this, I ask you to hit the like button on YouTube. I've archived almost all, or a tremendous amount of my old sports talk show. Be continuing to do that, but of course now we're going to be focusing on these podcasts and getting back on the air as well on mainstream radio, TV, or what have you. So until next time, hit the bell, like me on YouTube, follow me on Medium. I'm Marky Billson. So long, everyone.